This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
The New York Giants are celebrating their 100th anniversary here in 2024 and recently came out with their top 100 players of all time. Of course, number one on the list is the legend Lawrence Taylor. Others in the top 10 include Rosie Brown, Frank Gifford, and Eli Manning. But number three on the list is a guy many don't know, and that's because he is best known for his play at center, one of the top centers to ever play the game. And next, on Sports Forgotten Heroes, we'll take a look back at his Hall of Fame career. We're talking Mel Hein.
This is Sports Forgotten Heroes, a tribute to the stars who shaped the games we love to watch and the games we love to play. Stars who provided us with many thrills, but when their time was up, they faded away. We'll take a look back at their spectacular careers, their moments of fame, even if it was just for one season or just one game. And now, here's your host, Warren Rogan.
Hello and welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes, episode number 142, Mel Hein. Hey, a few weeks back, episode number 138, we spoke about great 60-minute men, guys who played both sides of the line of scrimmage, and one of the best was Mel Hein. Not only did he set the standard at center, in which all centers would be measured against, the legend Bronco Nagurski called Hein the best linebacker he ever played against. That's how good Mel Hein was. Didn't matter which side of the ball he lined up on, he was a star, a Hall of Famer, wherever it was he played. Signed in 1931 by the Giants after a spectacular career at Washington State, once Hein stepped on the field, it would be 15 years of terror for whomever he and the Giants were playing. Hein is the only offensive lineman ever named NFL MVP. Think about that for a moment. A center named NFL MVP. He was a part of 2 championship teams with the Giants, played in 4 NFL All-Star games, was first-team All-Pro 8 times, was named to the NFL's 75th anniversary team and the NFL's 100th anniversary team. Additionally, he was a part of the Pro Football Hall of Fame's inaugural class of 1963, and he was inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame in 1954. Joining me on the podcast today to talk about Mel Hein is one of the most knowledgeable football historians around, Chris Willis, who has authored several books on the NFL and also works as the head archivist for NFL films. Chris has studied film, scoured statistics, and read more about football history than almost anyone. And he's a huge fan of Mel Hein, and today's discussion, I promise, is a terrific one. Before we get there, though, please give Sports Forgotten Heroes a follow on X or Twitter at SportsFHeroes. Follow on Facebook, and please follow, rate, and review wherever it is you listen. As always, thanks for your support. Okay, without further ado, let's get into today's show about Mel Hein with my guest, Chris Willis. Chris, welcome back to Sports Forgotten Heroes. You are sort of becoming a regular here.
No, thanks for having me back. Look forward to all our talks, and anytime we get to talk about early pro football and some forgotten heroes is always good time.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. A lot of fun. Today, Mel Hein, and I know he's one of your favorites. And I think we actually need to start with this. He is the only offensive lineman named an MVP in NFL history. What made Mel Hein such a special talent? And what was it that he did to earn such a special place in football history?
Yeah, I think the thing about Hein, when you look at him, is first he was physically gifted. I mean, he was 6'2", 225 pounds. So and he could run. He could move. He just wasn't a big slug. He was very agile, especially as a center. Back then, if you're a single wing or uh, you're snapping the ball to certain spots, and it's not a T formation where quarterback's under center and just like he's got to put the ball out in front of either the fullback or a halfback, somebody that's on the move. So I think that's the first thing you look at is, especially for that time of the two-way players, he was physically imposing and just a physically gifted athlete, and I think the other thing was, I think he had a little bit of drive, where, he wanted to play pro football, though he was from the West Coast, where there was no NFL teams. There was not a lot of pro football presence. So for somebody to grow up in the state of Washington, wanting to play, pro football, so I think he had a drive to that maybe some other, some of the players coming through who might have just, done it for the money or, oh, I'll do it for a year, and then I'll move on, he played 15 years. So I think when you combine his athletic ability with his drive, just like most great athletes, then you turn out to be, something pretty special.
So, as if being named NFL MVP wasn't enough, he was also a part of the inaugural class inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, along with guys like Red Grange and Bronco Nagurski and Dutch Clark and Don Hudson. How did his game, playing center and playing linebacker for the New York Giants, contribute to the actual legacy of the game of football when it comes to the NFL?
Well, he just was an elite player for 15 years. There was not a big drop off, of his play, even later in his career. He was either first or second team All Pro pretty much every year. Sometimes when guys, play that long, maybe their play or their level of play drops off, and oh wow, they were All Pro for 8 of those 15 years. Nope, he seemed to have the same ability and the same, like I said, it just was no drop off for him, and I think when you look at those first members of the Pro Football Hall of Fame, they all had some of these attributes, where they dominated their position, they won championships, they influenced the game. I remember doing more research on him, and there were players who said, "Oh yeah, I went and watched him play, to learn the position." Alex Wojciechowski, who played for the Eagles, who's a Hall of Famer later, he said, "Yeah, I went to the the Polo Grounds and to watch him play." To learn, to get better, and I think, a lot of players did that, with Hein in his position. So, he was, no question, was going to be what we would call first ballot Hall of Famer now. There's no question that he was going to be a part of that charter class.
One of the things I found interested in reading some of your stuff was that, if I understand this correctly, from a very young age, he wanted to be a center. He wanted to snap the ball. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think for Hein, it wasn't like he couldn't play another position, but I think from early on he had some older brothers who played football too, and one of his brothers who went on to play at Washington State, a couple years old, was a quarterback, or a halfback, so when he wanted to practice in the summer, he'd get his younger brother and he's like, "Oh, you're pretty good at that. Why don't you just hike me the ball?" And Mel's probably thinking, "Oh, well, I'm impressing my older brother. Let me do this good." So he actually worked at it. He's like, "Hey, you know what? I'll hike you this, this position if you're moving and you want to move and, out of the single wing or whatever." So I think he took pride in that, and he's like, "Hey, here's a skill I can learn, and be better than anybody, at the time." Even though he was very young, this is even right before he got into high school, or his early high school years, working with his brother, and but it turned out that helped him in the end. Like nobody was better at snapping the ball and knowing the techniques and getting your head up quick sometimes, as you snap it, before you get, busted in the mouth or hit by the charge, the defensive player. So he was, So almost from, earlier in almost high school, like he learned how to play center and it paid off. Look what he became, in college and then obviously in the NFL.
Yeah, it certainly did. I mean, it paid off. His career is littered. I mean, littered with great honors. And it all started at Washington State. Mel played for the Cougars from 1928 through 1930. His final year, he led Washington State to the Rose Bowl. Talk about his years at Washington State and how his college career helped prepare him for his professional career. And by the way, I think you said this earlier, he was one heck of an athlete. He also played for the basketball team and was on the track team as well at Washington State.
Yeah, he did it. You could say he almost did it all. He was a three-sport guy. Even once he filled out, he's 6'2", 225, and but he could move. Like he was a very good athlete. You could see it on film. Like some of the Giants footage. He can run. He was very athletic. In his speed and his movement. But at Washington State, this is some of their heydays, some of their glory years was under Babe Hollenberry, and he was coached up very well. He also learned from one of his fellow offensive linemen. Was Turk Edwards, was on the same team, who became a Hall of Fame tackle also. Down the road, so there was a lot of talent on that team. And he. Like I said, he was willing to learn, and he put a lot of effort in it, and you could see where it paid off. But specific, Northwest wasn't known as a juggernaut. University of Washington was getting better headlines at the time, so this was a couple of years there where Washington State kind of competed on the national level. Like I said, they got to the Rose Bowl. They came up short against Alabama, who was a juggernaut at that time, but they were on the map, and like I said, and it paid off later, once he graduated, because although he played on the West Coast, which didn't get a lot of attention, several NFL teams were interested in, signing him. So, the coaches, they knew who Mel Hein was and how he could play.
Yeah, how did it work? How did scouting work back then? Because it's not like you had television like you have today, and getting around wasn't as easy as it is today. So how do you first hear about a guy like Mel Hein? Is it through reading newspapers? Do the Giants or other teams have scouts in strategic locations around the country? How did that work?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit a combination of things. One, I mean, teams really didn't have scouts, traveling as sort of team employees like they do now. It was mainly, it started with the head coach, so take, for example, like when Hein graduated in some of the play, coaches like Steve Owen and Curly Lambeau and Potsy Clark, they would reach out to some of their guys, so they might have had coaches on the West Coast that they, played with or had coached with and had gone on to a different program, or like you said, there's a combination of newspaper headlines and All-American teams. You just read, okay, this guy's an All-American, he's a senior, maybe we can see if he's interested in playing. And a lot of times it didn't work out, but for some players like Mel Hein, he would get a letter, but a lot of times it facilitated from the head coach. House was the same way. He knew tons of coaches and players, and some of his former players were coaches, and he would reach out to him, say, "Oh, do you know a guy in your area? Or you know a guy, in your conference?" And he's like, "Oh," and you would get some word of mouth, and obviously they knew football too, so they would keep up on some of the college players. But a lot of times that's kind of how it worked a little bit, especially in the 30s. And Mel Hein.
I would imagine that, I'll call them the glamour positions: running back, receiver, quarterback, halfback. I would imagine they probably grabbed the headline. So maybe lineman was more of a crapshoot than anything.
Yeah, but I think for those teams that were in the NFL at that time, they did take finding linemen seriously. It wasn't, you just had to, because the line was like, just like today, it's, almost both, probably more important then because you had more on the line. You didn't have as many, four wide receiver sets. And so you needed, the center was a big position and your tackles were a big position. You might luck into, getting the guard, but you wanted two big tackles or tackles that could actually, chew up some ground, and you needed a versatile center that could actually snap the ball and be able to be athletic and block, so the Mel Hines, the Bulldog Turners, Claire Randolph with the Spartans and the Lions, like those guys were valuable, and you'd want to, and they played a little bit long because you wanted that center that actually, be durable, and, because you think, even now snapping the ball is easy. Anybody can do it. No, not back then. It was not an easy. It wasn't a simple skill to just snap the ball like under center. You had to really hike the ball, to the backs in the backfield, and to find somebody that could do that pretty well and block and play defense. The coaches from that era tried to go out of their way to try to find, as good a players like that.
Now, when Mel played, this was pre-draft NFL. I think the NFL, if I remember correctly, didn't start the draft until 1936. So how did teams go about acquiring and signing college talent? Again, was it a free-for-all? Were there territories? How did it work prior to the NFL draft that a team would go get one of the players?
No, it was everybody for their own, teams could sign anybody they want, sometimes you just started with a letter. Some might do some self scouting, George Hallis, had seen guys play, their games were on Sundays. So sometimes they would go to, to Illinois or Northwestern, or the University of Chicago was big at that time in the 20s and 30s, and they would do some scouting, or, he would send, some of his friends or some of his, guys that he coached, say, maybe go check out, because he actually self-scouted Red Grange. He went in Red's junior year to see what all the hype was. He wrote about it in his autobiography. He went to a game against Iowa where they won 30-0, and Grange had a huge day, and he's like, oh, that really got Hal's attention. Like, this is somebody we need in pro football and in NFL, and especially for his Bears. So a lot of times it just started with letters, it started communication, and Western Union or that type of stuff. But each team was free to sign anybody, and that's the reason why the draft sort of became what it was, and initially presented by Burt Bell, because Burt Bell and also Art Rooney a little bit, but especially Burt Bell, because he presented to the owners' meetings, in 36, is we need a draft because he was frustrated because he couldn't sign these All-Americans. He would, there was an example, he wanted to sign Stan Constantine, who played for Minnesota. He was an All-American. He actually went to Minnesota and said, and he gave him a really good offer. And he's like, I'll pay you $200 a game. Nobody's getting $200. You're a rookie. And he's like, that's great. Let me step out the room 1 second. And he called, I think it was the Giants, and the Giants offered more money. And he said, I'm going to sign with the Giants. And it's like, so Bell got frustrated, with the process, and said, hey, look, if we're going to have balance, we're going to have parity, like, we need to have the draft. And, obviously the teams with the worst records were able to pick first. And Hallis and Mara said, yeah, you're right. Let's do it, because it's better for the league than for myself. And you have to give them credit, because they had the most to lose, and they were willing to accept that and stuff. So, but yeah, it was a little bit of a free for all, back then. And like I said, a lot of the Bears, Giants, and Washington, and Green Bay, and it's got all the best players, and some of the Brooklyns and Philadelphia Eagles, Pittsburgh Steelers, like they were not on par and didn't have as much funds to try to outbid other teams for players.
Well, I think not having a draft and being the team from New York really helped the Giants in getting Hein. He was, as I understand, being courted by the the Portsmouth Spartans, the Providence Steamroller, and the New York Giants. And somewhere along the way, Portsmouth fell out of the picture. But Providence and New York were sort of going head to head, and Mel basically accepted an offer from Providence. But the story doesn't end with him accepting the offer with Providence. How did Mel wind up with the Giants? It's quite interesting, and the United States Postal Service has something to do with that. Tell us about it.
Absolutely. These are type of stories that are just like, those early years, 20s and 30s and 40s, like they wouldn't have it today. And they're just, so like, just weird and like, no, that couldn't have happened. You couldn't, no, it did, So, Mel, once he graduated, like you said, he was contacted by several teams, mostly by letter. And he was kind of excited, although he's a West Coast kid, that, he thought he wanted to play for the Giants. He's like, I'll play. He played for New York. But he had not heard, anything official from the Giants, or he did not get a contract. And he did get a contract from Jimmy Conzelman of the Providence Steamrollers to play for $125 a game. And for him, that was enough. Like, yeah, I would play for free. And so he was waiting. He just finally said, I'm about to get married, and I need to, if I'm going to go all the way to Providence or the East Coast, I gotta, know I have some money in my pocket and I have a job. So he signed the Providence one. He took it down to the postmaster, the post office, and he kind of mailed it. And then that night, which is lucky for him, he had a basketball game, where Ray Flaherty was coaching. Ray Flaherty was from Gonzaga, from the area. He's playing for the Giants. And he knows Mel Hein's going to be good. He knows the Giants want to sign him, and they shake hands. He goes, so what did you think of the Giants offer? And he's like, well, I didn't get an offer, so I just signed with the Steamrollers, and, just went to the post office. And he was like, how much did they offer? 125. He's like, no, Giants are going to offer you $150 a game, guaranteed, spot on, and it was like, what you need to do is go to the post office, call the postmaster in Providence, tell them when they receive it to send it back, and then I'll get you the contract for the Giants. And that's what happened. He went down to the post office. The postmaster said, yes, we just, we got it. We're going to pull it. Okay. We didn't even give it to Conzelman and the Steamrollers. And he ends up signing with the Giants, and he drives, clear across the country with his new bride. And he plays for the next 15 years for the New York Giants. And who would have known? Maybe he goes to Providence, plays for a couple of years. They're not maybe as good. He doesn't feel comfortable, and he, doesn't have the career he has. But the Giants was the perfect spot. But it's a crazy, crazy story of how a team comes to acquiring a player.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Well, it didn't take long for the Giants and their coach, as you mentioned, the great Steve Owen, to see that they had something special. Talk about how quickly Hein adapted to professional football. And in fact, he might have actually been better than some of the seasoned veterans on the team. Talk about that and the fact that just how much Hein loved the game of football.
Yeah, he jumped right in. Like he was excited. I mean, you got to think this is 1931, and he's going clear across the country. So that's a big to do to begin with. You're going It's not like nowadays where you kind of, oh yeah, I'll go to Los Angeles, I'll go to New York, I'll go across country, So he's taking his new bride to New York City at the time, and he was all business. He came in there. Everybody knew he could play. From the beginning, he showed for. He did not start. His first game. Second game. They had a veteran, like you said. They had some veteran guys that were pretty decent that Steve Owen had brought in. But Mickey Murtaugh was the starting center, and he got really banged up in the second or third game of that season's rookie season. And Hein came in and just played lights out. Like he kind of Wally pipped Mickey, and he became starting center. Played linebacker, and sort of became a force early on. There was quotes from like Hallis. He's like, we usually wanted to sort of run and take care of the rookie. He was easy to fool, but he's like, with Mel Hein, you couldn't do that. Like, as a rookie, we tried it 6-7 times and we couldn't fool him, and he was never out of place. And they're like, oh crap, let's go somewhere else. Go a different direction and stuff. So, he just jumped in, and then by year 3, he was captain of the team, and was pretty much a leader even from his rookie and second year. But by his third year, he was captain, every year until he retired. But
he believed in team. He was a true leader. Talk about those leadership skills, because they were recognized, like you just said, pretty much right off the bat. And talk about his observations as a rookie and how he wasn't thrilled with how rookies were treated. He sort of did a couple of things.
Yeah, as great as Steve Owen was, he was still fairly young, still a fairly younger coach. He wasn't like in his 50s and 60s. He had just finished playing, or were still playing a little. And so when Hein joined the team, a lot of veterans, and he saw that even for team's sake and teamwork and stuff, that the rookies weren't invited to a lot of things. So a couple of the veterans were going to the movies, or going to dinner, or whether it's on the road or at home, or after practice, or maybe a beer after the game, that the rookies weren't invited at all, really. And he sort of said to himself, like, "Val, hey, if made a vow, like, hey, if I'm going to be around, as a veteran on this team, or as a member of this team, is like, I will not let that happen." And and everybody followed Hein, on the Giants, and I think that's why they were so successful that entire run. They went to 7 championship games, won a couple. They were always in the mix. They were never this terrible team, or losing losing records and stuff like that. And I think it was probably because that he made sure, hey, we're going to be a team. The rookies, if you good enough to make the team, and play, you're going to be included, and it's not going to take us a year or two to have that type of camaraderie and stuff like that. So, he said that in a lot of interviews, and, took pride in that. Like, hey, look, we're going to be, a team. And he was sort of the main guy. And even Wellington Mara and the ownership, they knew that, hey, follow that guy, or he'll lead you and he'll teach you, and he'll be not only your teammate, he'll be your friend and leader. So
he plays center, he plays linebacker, 2 very physically demanding positions. Now, Chris, I did a little bit of research, a lot of research, prior to our conversation here. In today's game, if my research is correct, in today's game, the average career length of an NFL offensive lineman is just under 4 years. And for a linebacker, incredibly, it's just under 3 years. Of course, there are those who play longer, really good football players who play longer. But Hein played 15 years at center and linebacker. Talk about his toughness and his physicality.
Yeah, I think when you talk about special players, Hall of Famers, these are the type of characteristics and sort of themes that come out, and Hines, no exception. He, I think he took care of his body. He knew, he would take a pounding and things like that. So he was always looking at that and then, keeping up on, what he had to do and stuff. But you're right. 15 years of, with not that much padding and, the leather helmet, it wasn't like they were, all geared up. And so he was durable. They didn't even miss a game in pretty much 15 years, so it wasn't like a few of those years, he played half the game or near the, he played, every single game, for 15 years. And it's like I said, his level of play did not diminish. And I think that's part of his drive, he just wanted to be the best. He wanted to play hard. He wanted to, do it for his team, his teammates, and he would not let anybody down. And he just had that drive that, especially if you're, Steve Owen is like, hey, these are players I want for, like he said, that Steve Owen said, in several articles in his book, like Mel Hein is the best player he ever coached, and he's one of the best players he's ever saw and stuff. So that shows, I think, how he just like treated the game and how he wanted to be, all over the field. I mean, I remember watching a lot of footage of him, and one of the things I always thought was he, especially on defense, obviously he was, nobody was better at center than him, but on defense, sometimes you would see guys making tackles and they're like, oh, they're 5, 6, 7, 10 yards downfield, a lot of times, or they're not, especially linebackers, you get out of positions. He was always at the line of scrimmage. He could read a play, guys like, Curly Lambeau, George Hallis, would always say he knew he could diagnose a play better than anybody. And you could see it on film. Like a lot of his tackles and his activity is right at the line of scrimmage. It's not, he's out of position or he's always chasing down the play, or you see some of these, assisted tackles and stuff. No, he's right at the line of scrimmage, right where the play, he diagnoses it very well. And that always shows how special he was.
Yeah, he really was a special player, particularly at center. I mean, he might be one of the top 3 or 4 centers of all time, and I don't think that is something that can be argued. How did the position of center evolve during his career, and how did the way he played center help influence the play of centers everywhere?
Well, he was just a technician, like his technique was flawless. He knew how to, between his stance and, the way he hiked the ball, where he needed to place the ball was like second to none, and you could see it, every once in a while he might, not be in the perfect position for the block and it, but if you're playing center, you're thinking of all these things, you're snapping it, you're making sure you keep your head up. You're not, guys not just going by you because you're in the middle of bringing your head back up. Like it took a lot of technique, to a lot of timing, and he would do it as well as anybody of that era. And I think for the other players, he was a standard. Like he was first team All Pro, every year. And so some of the players in college who took it that seriously, or wanted to play pro ball, would see how he played, and try to maybe mimic, what he did and stuff. And there were even Hall of Famers, like I mentioned with Alex Wojda. He said, oh, I went to the games just to see how he practiced, how he snapped, how he played, how he blocked. So I could, take that with me. He's playing at Fordham at the time, with the 7 blocks of granite with Vince Lombardi. That's how he improved, and stuff. So there's no doubt that, he impressed other players and, the players, that were coming up of how to play the position.
And like we said, not only was he considered one of the greatest centers of all time, he was a really good linebacker, maybe even great. In fact, you said that Bronco Nagurski said that Hein was the greatest linebacker he ever played against. talk about his skills at linebacker. You got into it just before, but I mean, this guy was just a phenom at linebacker as well.
Yeah, he would play mainly on the outside. He wasn't in the middle. Every once in a while he might move, but he was always around the ball, like I said, in a lot of running plays, in the 30s and early 40s, and especially if you're the Bears, you had Bronco Nagurski, almost the entire time. Bronco was a rookie in 1930, Hein was in 31, and Hein just gave Nagurski fits, and the Bears fits, because he was like I said, he was 6'2", 225. So physically, he's got all the the big skills, and not quite as large as Bronco, but wasn't a slouch. And he would use his hands, and he would diagnose plays, just as well as anybody. And he would shed, blockers. He just wouldn't, take on the block with his shoulder or something. Like, he would try to, keep his hands and his arms free. And another skill he had was, he could tackle. Tackling was just as good in those years. Now it's a little bit all over the place. But you had to tackle back then, and because he was 6'2", he had this huge arm span, and once he grabbed you, you went down. You did not. There's not too many guys that ran Hein over or would break his tackle, because he just had a knack of once he got around, got wrapped his arms around you, you were going down. Like, even Bronco, it's like I said, Bronco had fits with him. He's like, couldn't get away from him, or he was the best linebacker. And the other thing he could do, because he moved well in space, he could play the pass. He was very good in coverage. He was.
Yeah, Don
He
Hudson.
could move.
Don Hudson didn't have much success in games in which the Packers were playing the Giants, and when Mel Hein was on the field.
Yeah, that surprised me. When I was dug more into the research, because I think Steve Owen was in his book was like made the quote, "Oh yeah, Hein would drop back and he would stop Hudson." He in his first 7-8 games, he didn't even score a touchdown. And I was like, is that true? 7, like the first 5 years, 7 games, that doesn't sound. And then you look it up, and it's absolutely true. Like Don Hudson, his first 5 years against the Giants, I think it's 7 games, had 0 touchdowns. And it was mainly because of Owen, Hein actually worked with Owen. Like, he would, sort of drop back and force, Hudson to change his route a little bit, or he would have Hudson, cut underneath him. Like, he would get more depth on his drop, and he would cut. So he would just catch the pass for like 5 yards, and he would tackle him, and maybe it was, 3rd down, and, they needed 10, and but because of where Hein was playing, he would cut his route off, and, they might still complete the pass. But he told us, he's like, look, I'm just giving him the short stuff. He's not going to get deep behind us and catch touchdowns, and he's not going to get first downs. And it is true. Now, he had a little more success in the second half, like in the 40s, a little bit more. But those first, 5 years, like 7 games, Hudson was not a scoring machine against the Giants. And they actually played in 2 championship games, and they both split. Hudson did not score in either game, 38-39. But they did split, so the Giants won 1, the Packers won 1. So that was something that I found in the research that, blew me away kind of, because that was like the first time anybody had that much success with Hudson, where, even as good at teams as like the Bears and Washington and the Lions, they did not have that much success with trying to defend Hudson, let alone, 7 straight games where he doesn't score a touchdown.
Yeah. Going back to the other side of the line of scrimmage, center, you were talking just a little while ago about how he influenced the play of center. When we think of today's modern day center, we think of guys like Jason Kelsey and Jeff Saturday and Nick Mangold. And go back a few more years, you got Mike Webster and Jeff Van Note and Dwight Stevenson. did anything that Hein did, any innovation, anything in the way that he played the game at center influence the play of the guys who play center today?
Well, I think it's just more the technique, the way he snapped the ball, the way he would come off the line, the mentality, of the way how he approached the game, the way he prepared. Um, uh, Maybe not technique wise, because the ball's changed a little bit, and things like that. And everything's either now there's more out of the shotgun now than like that could be. Oh wow, but there's a big part of the generation where with a T formation and quarterback under center, the Dwight Stevensons and the Mike Websters, were more hiking, just snapping the ball. They were not doing shotgun and things like that. Where now that's what you look for. I think although I think if Hein played today, he would probably be an outside linebacker and, who could just run, I don't know if he'd play center, with his athletic skills, he was pretty good. I think he might play, but if he was 295 pounds, like he would be, a great center too, just cause he had the technique down and he could play the position better than anybody.
Well, when we talk about athletes, and Hein was definitely an athlete. You and I recently did a podcast about 60-minute men. And when we talk about the aforementioned centers of the game, we neglect the fact, and they all great centers. I mean, what can you take away from Kelsey and Stevenson and Van Note and guys like that? You can't take anything away from them. They were great, great football players. But we can't neglect the fact that they only played center. He also played linebacker, another great one who we talked about on our podcast about 60-minute men, or Chuck Bednarik. Talk about how unique both of these guys were. It wasn't that they were 60-minute men. They were great, and I mean great, on both sides of the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to define those players even in that era, guys that you can count on for that many years, pretty much, playing at a high level. And the same thing with Chuck, his play did not diminish. You would think sometimes you would wear down. I mean, even some of the grades of the 2A era slowed down at certain spots, and you could see their play a little bit okay, or they retired after 8 years, 9 years, although an 8, 9, 10-year career, like you mentioned, was a very long career at that time. But even with that said, like I said, those two guys, when you watch them, rookies, first, second year, and then how they played even later in their career, their last 2 or 3, there was not a lot of, drop off. And that's, I think, very hard. It's very hard to find those type of guys. It's
latter half of Mel Hein's career. That's when he was intercepting balls. I mean, he had 10 interceptions. They all came in the latter half of his career, and he ran back 78 yards for a touchdown.
Yeah. So I mean, that just shows how, he had a nose for the ball and he knew he could diagnose plays. And just watching him, like I said, on film, it's just a joy to, like, oh, wow. And I think, like I mentioned in the previous podcast about players, when you watch some of the footage, you're like, okay, that guy's good. I can see how Don Hudson and Sammy Ball are better than, just athletic one, and then also skill level and technique. And Mel Hein's the same way. You watch a Giant game, whoever they play, you're like, oh, who's number 7? Giant number 7 seems to be a pretty good player, on offense and on defense. And like I said, those are the special players that, don't come around too often, and you got to enjoy them.
Well, speaking of the Giants and Mel Hein, a name that's recently been in the news for the old-time Giants is Ray Flaherty. He wore number 1, and New York's most recent number 1 pick, Malik Neighbors, was given permission to wear that retired number. Flaherty, of course, was the guy who suggested New York wear sneakers in the 1934 NFL championship game against the Chicago Bears. What was Hine's role in that game, and how did wearing sneakers help him and the Giants in that 30-13 win over the Bears? How did all that work out?
Yeah, I mean, that's another one of these stories, just like, signing a contract, that morning, in New York, the field there at the, Polo Ground was just a sheet of ice, and they're like, this is not good. But Flaherty, who, looked to Steve, I was like, oh, wait, one time playing in Gonzaga, we wore sneakers, and we were actually had some better traction than the cleats. And Steve Owen's like, oh, that sounds like a good idea. So they sent their equipment manager, Abe Cohen, to a local college. I believe it was Manhattan College, and he grabbed as many of the bigger sneakers as he could, and he brought them back. And the first half they played in cleats, and actually the Bears dominated. The Bears were undefeated at that time. They were actually, this is going to be the greatest team of all time. They were 13-0. And they had Bronco Nagurski, and he was running up and down, and they were up 13-3 at the half, and the Giants couldn't do anything. But they put the sneakers on, started the third quarter into the third quarter, and the game just changed. The Bears couldn't keep their footing, they couldn't do it, and the Giants just went up and down the field, and like I said, they scored 27 points in the second half, and just rolled, and they shut out the Bears. And Hein just had a really good game. He always loved telling that story, of playing in the sneaker game. And he was like, he would always tell the story, get a smile, and just like, oh yeah, Hallis was just frustrated, yelling, cursing on the sideline, and his players would come over and say, they're wearing sneakers. They're wearing sneakers, and Hallis was like, well, step on their toes, and but that must not have worked because the Giants, like I said, rolled in the second half, and it's one of those things. Like I said, you tell the story, people are like, you're making that up. Nope, it really happened. 1934 NFL championship game.
Well, 1938, of course, was the real special year for Hein. That's when he won the MVP. Tell us about his play that year and winning the championship game against Green Bay, and how all of that led to him being named the only center in the history of football to this day to win the NFL MVP.
Yeah, in 1938, that was the first year the NFL actually had an official MVP. Joe Carter, the president, actually, wanted it because, he's like, oh, this is a way of getting our players out there and our league out there. So there was a handful of sports writers from the cities. They would vote, kind of like what they do now. So it was the first year that they actually sanctioned one. And at the end of the year, they voted, and it was Mel Hein, which nowadays would be like Creed Humphrey of the Chiefs getting, the MVP vote. But because, obviously he played both ways, but his main focus was as a center. He's playing center, he's hiking the ball, he's blocking, and he did it better than anybody in 1938. The defense was the number one defense, scoring, he gave up 79 points. I think the Lions were second with like 100, like they didn't give up hardly any points. They won the Eastern Division. They played at home against the Packers. And during the pregame of that game, Carr gives him, a little wristwatch, which was the award. Was, hey, here's your watch. And, Hein gets it. There's a photo before the game where he's giving him the watch, and Hein goes out there and they win the championship against a good Packers team. And but that's how he was. He was, he was. And more research I did in like 39, I'd say he was the best player, and he's my retro MVP for 39. And he's actually.
What is retro MVP? Is that you? What is retro MVP? Yeah. What is that?
Well, that's something that I've done with my research, and it was in the book about the 60-Minute Men. I actually started it on John Turney's website, Pro Football Journal, of saying there was no MVP before 1938. So from 1920 to 1937, for the most part, there was no MVP awards, and the NFL didn't sanction one. It wasn't like baseball, American MVP, National League MVP and stuff. So I've gone back within my research and I did a few of those years, for the website, Pro Football Journal. And then for this book, I was like, well, I want to finish it. I want to do all, from 1920 to 1945. And I want to see who I think, through research, through game recast footage, like everything, I wanted to see who would be MVP. And in 38, it was Hein. 39, it was Hein. And he finished in the top 5. I think, I think there was like 2 more years where he finished in the top 5. Like he had such a good year. The team, whether it was defense or offense, the team had great year, and he just performed at a high level. And it proved to me that's why he was number 4 on the list. He's up there with Don Hudson and Dutch Clark and Sammy Ball. Like for 15 years, he's playing at one of the highest levels, of any player in the NFL. And to be compared with, guys who touch the ball all the time, catch the ball all the time, you can't lose fact that the game was still played at the line of scrimmage and you play both ways. And he did it just as about, especially on the line, he did it better than anybody. He was the highest rated lineman, on that list. So, and like I said, he was the runner up for center on the 50th anniversary team for the NFL. He was on the NFL's 75th anniversary team. He was on the NFL's 100th all-time team, just a few years ago, as one of like the 4 centers in all of the first 100 years, and he's on that team. And there was no debate, he was going to make that team, So he's just, he's pretty special player.
Chris, I'm also a pretty huge golf fan. I love the history of the game of golf, particularly Ben Hogan. I've done a lot of work in video about Ben Hogan, and he was very cerebral, very intelligent, had great intelligence when it came to dissecting a golf course, to dissecting a golf swing, his acumen for the game, his quest for perfection. And when I was reading about Mel Hein and listening to you speak about Mel Hein now, he reminds me a little bit of Ben Hogan as far as his approach to the game. Talk about his football IQ.
Yeah, he was like we've been talking a little bit about, like he had the great technique. He had great work ethic, and he could put both of them together and show it on the field, but he knew the game in and out, like I mentioned before with House, like you couldn't fool him as a rookie. Like, a lot of times you see it now, Caleb Williams he's clueless, hopefully in a couple of years, he's going to, take off and you can get it. Well, Hein was one of those special rookies that came in and, you couldn't fool him. He was all business, he was professional, and he sort of could, like you said, that football IQ was always there. And even
he studied the game. He studied the game when he was still playing the game.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I don't think he ever stopped studying. Like he studied while he played, for 15 years, like even later in his career, he would make sure, he knew what he was doing, and would play at a high level. And then he was a coach, he coached at Union College. He coached at USC with Al Davis, and then, he became, Al Davis kind of recruited him in the AFL years, in the middle of the AFL, to be supervisor of officials, which he did for a couple of years. And then when the merger happened, he went to the NFL league office as supervisor. So he knew the rules. He knew, how to play the game. He knew technique. And like I said, he's a football lifer. And like I said, I don't think he ever stopped learning. Like he spent almost nearly 50 years in football, and I think he loved learning and finding out new things and teaching and passing it on or learning something, even when he was 65 years old and he's a supervisor of officials. So
there's guys like that who it's intoxicating to them. They just can't stop. And so when his playing days were over, he did go into coaching, like you said, Union College. So he goes to Union College, but the Giants still wanted him to play. Talk about that. He coached 6 days a week and played for the Giants one day a week.
Yeah, I believe that started in 1942. He was thinking about retiring. He's like, I've played I think he was played 11, 12 years now. 12 seasons. And he's like, I think and he got a job at Union College where he could go. And then obviously in 1942, it's World War II. So there's a little bit of a man shortage, and Owens reached out to him. He's like, no, I need you, Mel. Can you play? Like, you're okay. You can teach at Union College and teach the young kids, but you can play on Sunday because you know the system. And yep, that's what he did. He would, spend 6 days there, come play on Sunday, with the Giants, and they actually in 1942 had a good year, and his play did not suffer, and then he's like, maybe I could play 43, 44. And so he plays 3 more years after that, before he officially retires. And
now after his days with Union, he went on to the All-America Football Conference with the Los Angeles Dons. By the way, Dons for Don Amici, believe it or not. They were actually named after the famous actor Don Amici, the Los Angeles Dons. Now, I'm a little fuzzy here. He was the head coach, went 2-1, and then stepped back to be a line coach. Do you know how all that worked? I'm a little fuzzy on that. I don't know if you can answer that question.
No, I mean, that is a little fuzzy. I think it was one of those things where, that league was still a young league, it only played 4 years, so I think Mel just wanted to be with the line. He didn't want to, because those are the only games he was as a head coach. He never even, he spent a dozen or over 10 years with USC.
15 years as a line coach.
Yeah. And so I don't think he ever wanted to be the head man. So maybe it was those things where it just happened, it's a new league, each year was a little different for the teams. Some teams struggled, and the Dons were just in the middle of the pack. They were an okay team, obviously the Browns and the 49ers. And then once they joined the NFL, they only took, those couple teams. And so I don't think it was something. I think he's like, I'll do it because we're in transit. But I think he just never wanted to be, because he never inspired to be a head coach, throughout his post career.
Well, I can just answer my next question. He spent all that time at USC, 15 years. Did he ever want to be a head coach? Did he have those aspirations? I guess the answer is no. Now, he met Al Davis, knew Al Davis at that time, and you talked about it, that Al got him into a new role, supervisor of officials. How did that all come about, and why move into that role, and what made Mel think that was actually, and what made Al think that Mel was a good fit to become supervisor of officials?
Well, I think for one, this was right at the time. This is pre-merger talk, and this is at the height of, the AFL going to war with the NFL, and Al Davis gets elected, commissioner. He sort of leaves the Raiders a little bit. Oh, I'll be commissioner. We're going to fight and we're going to defeat the NFL. And, and one of his first moves was like, hey, I'm going to bring in Mel. They were, really close friends at USC. They'd been on the staff for a couple of years. And I just think Mel probably thought, this is, a way of getting back into pro football. The AFL seems to be, legit, this, when they started in 1960, a lot of Mickey Mouse jokes, for the AFL. So now it's like 66, early 66. And it's like, oh, now the league's got a little bit of respect. They got some players, they signed Joe Namath the year before. And, so I think he just took it as, hey, it's a challenge. Let me help out my friend. Let's try to do this. And, obviously the merger happened in the summer of 66. Al felt betrayed. He went back to the Raiders. He's like, you guys are, on your own, but Hines still had the position. So he finishes that out. So, which I think he liked it. Like, there was no doubt he could do the job, and I think Al just didn't pick him because he was his buddy. Al picked him because he knew he was smart and he could do the job, also, and his name, Mel Hein, had a lot of respect, so he went with it. Like I said, if it was just hiring a buddy, he would have left. But no, he stayed to the end. Then he went to New York. He actually went back to New York. He left the West Coast, and he worked in the league office with the officials, for I think till 1974, and then he officially retired. But he liked his time working with Roselle. So he liked the job. He wanted to do it. If it was just hiring a buddy or he didn't think he could, then he would have, left, but, he wanted to see it through, and, he did that for a while too. So, and did it well.
Awesome. How do we summarize the career of Mel Hein?
Well, I mean, I think it's great that you want to talk about Mel. A lot of these early players sometimes get lost, but this year, like I said, I'm glad you did it because the Giants are, celebrating their 100th season this year, and they revealed their, top 100 players, last month, and Mel was number 3 on that list. Lawrence Taylor was 1, Rosie Brown was 2, Mel was 3, and I think Frank Gifford was 4, so, and there was a different committee for that elected that. And so I was so happy to see that they, respected his resume and his impact with the Giants. Because if you're just behind LT and Rosie Brown, then and ahead of Gifford, then you're in good shape, or you're in good company and you're one of the all-time great. I mean, that's 100 years of the Giants, and he's the 3rd best player. And you get, like I said, he's right there. He's still, one of their all-time greats, even though 1945 is the last time he played it down, So I think his legacy is strong. I wish he would get a little more attention, with the Hudsons and the Sammy Ball and the Dutch Clark, like those guys, Red Grange, George Howe, like those guys that were the greats, in that first 25, 30 years. Because he deserves it. He was a special player, and it's almost like, he's like, Dick Butkus and, Ray Lewis as a linebacker. I wish he was in that conversation because he should be. And obviously with the NFL 100 team in 2019, he was one of the 4 best centers, with, I think it was Stevenson, Webster, and was maybe Otto. And he was not like, he was recognized as that. Even after 100, like his name still, shows some value with the positions he played in the era he played. And so this type of talk, I appreciate you having me on talking about him because, he deserves at least to get that mention and to have his name pop up, within these type of discussions.
Wow. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. You are a wealth of knowledge, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking some time out of your evening to spend with me to talk to me about one of the truly great football players of all time, Mel Hein.
No, like I said, I'm glad to talk, and like I said, appreciate you inviting me on. I love the show, and like I said, you were talking about Fritz Pollard, now you're talking about Mel Hein, so this is like, they shouldn't be forgotten, like you said, and this is great to talk about them.
Awesome. I can't wait to have you on again.
No problem. I'll be back.
Throughout the course of the 100-year history of the New York Giants and the NFL, there have been very few like Mel Hein. A center, a linebacker, great at both, Hall of Famer, all-decades team of the 30s, named to the 75th NFL anniversary team and the 100th anniversary team. Think about that. 25 years passed and no one surpassed Hein. Other Hall of Fame players watched him play to learn their craft. Mel Hein was a one-of-a-kind superstar. Hey, thanks again to Chris for spending so much time with us and for all the fun stories. And thanks to all of you for listening, and I'll see you next time on Sports Forgotten Heroes.